All right, guys, so we have some absolutely horrifying updates coming out of Gaza as Israel is doubling and tripling down on their Trump-backed plan for a full-blown ethnic cleansing of the entire population of the Gaza Strip. And then we also have what I think is arguably one of the most egregious war crimes that we've seen over the last 17 months of this genocide, as it appears that Israel just summarily executed upwards of 15 medical workers in southern Gaza. So we'll get to that here in a second. But starting off here with the latest in terms of what the wanted fugitive war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu has to say about all of this. Here from Drop Site's Jeremy Scahill. He says, hours after Hamas announced that it had accepted a ceasefire plan drafted by negotiation mediators from Egypt and Qatar, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu laid out his plans on Sunday for what he called the, quote, final stage of his genocidal campaign in Gaza. Some history buffs might make an analogy here to the final solution, if you will. Now, Netanyahu continues saying Hamas will lay down its weapons, its leaders will be allowed to leave, we will see to the general security in the Gaza Strip, and will allow the realization of the Trump plan for voluntary migration. He told his cabinet on Sunday, referring to Trump's threat to seize Gaza and remove Palestinians from their land. He says, this is the plan. We are not hiding this, and we are ready to discuss it at any time. And he also went on to boast that we have an alliance with the greatest superpower in the world. I mean, on that, he's correct in terms of the U.S. complicity in all of this, but he later said that the Israeli cabinet had just voted in favor of intensifying military assault on Gaza. Now, think about just how absurdly dystopian this verbiage is here that he chose to use. Voluntary migration, sure. Voluntary under the threat of continued genocide. That's what we're talking about here. Voluntary migration, when the plan in question that you're discussing here is the forced expulsion, the ethnic cleansing of the entire population of Gaza. Does that seem voluntary to you guys? I mean, it's just absolutely insane. Now, they continue. They say Hamas's chief negotiator, Dr. Khalil al-Hayya, announced that Hamas had accepted a deal on Saturday put forward by Qatar and Egypt, the two main regional mediators, saying, quote, we do not want anything new. We want to respect what was signed, what the guarantors guaranteed, and what the international community approved. He says, out of our concern for our people and our families, we dealt with all offers responsibly and positively with the aim of achieving our goals of stopping the war. So the Qatari-Egyptian plan, to which Hamas just agreed to, is largely based on a proposal that was put forward by Steve Witkoff, Trump's special envoy, just 3 weeks ago. The plan calls for the release of 5 living Israeli captives, including U.S. dual citizen and IDF soldier Eden Alexander, in return for a temporary 50-day truce and a resumption of negotiations on implementing the second phase of the January ceasefire deal. So to recap what's happened over the last couple of months, you had a deal that was put in place, agreed to by Israel, by Hamas, that was guaranteed by the United States and other regional actors as well. And everybody agreed to this deal, had phase 1, 2, and 3. When we started to get to the point where they were supposed to begin negotiations on phase 2, right, there was already an agreed upon framework there, Israel refused to engage in the phase 2 negotiations. Instead, they had Steve Witkoff put forward like an entirely new proposal with different parameters, right? And at that time, it was like, okay, this is obviously another attempt here by Israel to fully sabotage the deal, right? That's what this is, okay? Very clearly telegraphed in that way. They've done it a million times over the last year and a half. It's not any sort of like mystery what's going on here. Now, Israel used that as a justification to resume the genocide, okay? Saying Hamas is the one who's blockading the deal, even though we already violated the deal dozens of different times, and then we were refusing to move on to phase 2. But even then, Hamas says, okay, we will largely abide by this Steve Witkoff new proposal. And even with that from Hamas, Netanyahu comes out not a day later and says, nah, you know what, fuck that. Our new demand is just the Trump plan. Again, for full-blown ethnic cleansing of Gaza. So just to, again, to recap and to give you a perspective in terms of like whether or not Israel is serious about engaging in ceasefire negotiations or who the real blockade to peace is, okay? It shouldn't be too difficult to figure out. Now, they continue down here saying on Monday morning, Israel issued forced displacement orders to almost the entire governorate of Rafah on Gaza's border with Egypt down in the south, the only gateway Palestinians in the Strip have to a world beyond Israeli control. They say, quote, the IDF is returning to fight with great force to eliminate the capabilities of terrorist organizations in these areas, according to Avichai Adre, the Israeli army's Arabic spokesman, who wrote this on Twitter. He included an image of a map directing thousands of Palestinians to immediately flee to Al-Mawasi, an overcrowded makeshift displacement camp built on sand dunes and lacking basic necessities such as water and electricity. What does this sound like to you guys other than a full-blown concentration camp? Right, that's what we're talking about. This is the actual post that he put out that Jeremy was just referring to there. You can see here on the map. Almost the entirety of the southern Gaza Strip down here in Rafah is being told, some tens and tens of thousands of them to go to this Al-Mawasi concentration camp where, again, there is no reliable access to food, to water, to medical supplies, to anything of the sort. This is where Israel is trying to stuff the entire population, or as much as they can, into. Now, they continue. They say throughout the weekend, as Palestinians in Gaza observed the Eid holiday that ends the holy month of Ramadan, Israeli forces pummeled areas across the Gaza Strip in what local journalists described as some of the heaviest bombing over the past 17 months. They say an airstrike in Khan Yunis on Monday left a massive crater where a building once stood. Quote, the massive destruction, according to Abdullah al-Adar, a Palestinian journalist, caused by the occupation's missiles after targeting the al-Maqdad family home, full of women and children. Holding a fragment of the munition, he said in a video posted on social media, quote, it weighs more than 15 kilograms. These are the war missiles, which the occupation uses against civilians. A neighbor who witnessed the attack told al-Adar that the children were happy for Eid and were sleeping. I didn't hear the strike and woke up from my sleep to the sound of the Maqdad children screaming. I didn't know where I was, and I thought my children and husband were killed. They also say that at least 53 Palestinians were killed in Israeli attacks just on Sunday alone. And an Israeli airstrike on displaced people in Khan Yunis killed 16 people, including 9 children and 3 women, according to local medical officials, saying, quote, they died in their Eid outfits. Why did they do this to us? So among the sites hit were tents housing displaced people, which seems to be one of Israel's favorite targets nowadays. They say gruesome images posted on social media by witnesses depicted the bodies of bloodied children killed in the attack. They had to be lifted from the shredded ruins of tents and blankets. They also say since Israel resumed its genocidal war against Gaza, senior Israeli officials have vowed that if Hamas does not unilaterally release the Israeli captives, they will, quote, permanently seize Israeli land. Saying here, quote, from the defense minister, Israel Katz, the more Hamas persists in its refusal to release the hostages, the more territory it will lose, which will then be annexed by Israel. And they also say that since Israel resumed this genocidal onslaught, more than 1,000 Palestinians, the majority of them women and children, have been killed. Now, just to pause on this for a second, the idea that this is about Israel prioritizing the safety, the well-being of their captives or their hostages that are still within inside Gaza is absolutely ridiculous to anybody who's been paying attention to what's been happening over the last 17 months. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli right wing especially, they could not give less of a shit about the Israeli hostages. Okay, that much is clear. They could have had a deal on the table over a year ago at this point to retrieve all of the hostages, alive and dead, from Gaza. They have been unwilling to do so. They have been repeatedly sabotaging any sort of deal that's been put forward. And in some instances, have even killed their own hostages as a part of their bombing campaign, or in some instances, outright shooting them while they're waving white flags. Right? The idea that this is about Israel desperately trying to get back their hostages, it's like, no, there was already a framework that was on the table that everybody agreed to that would have resulted in all of the hostages, dead and alive, being returned to Israel. And then you rip that deal to shreds in favor of resuming the bombing. So that essentially, as a reminder, Benjamin Netanyahu can keep himself in power, can keep himself away from the protests, can keep himself away from any sort of accountability for his corruption trial, and to keep together a coalition cobbled to, keep himself in a position of power. That's why all of this happened at the end of the day. Now, they continue. They say, as Israel continues its terror bombings of Gaza, and this is where we get to this absolutely egregious and disgusting war crime here, evidence continues to mount that Israeli forces recently summarily executed more than a dozen aid workers from the Palestinian Red Crescent and local civil defense crews in Rafah on March 23rd, just about a week ago. Israel initially stated that its forces fired upon suspicious vehicles in the area, but later acknowledged that its forces shot at an ambulance and other rescue workers. In an attempt to provide first aid to people who were injured in an Israeli attack down in Rafah, rescue and medical workers had been deployed to the Hashashin area of Rafah and had not been heard from since. On Saturday, officials from the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, also known as the OCHA, accompanied Palestinian Red Crescent workers to the scene of the massacre to recover the bodies from what officials described as a mass grave. A UN worker was among those who were found dead. Now, in terms of the obfuscation, the lies here from Israel in the immediate aftermath of this, and this is sort of just textbook what they do every time that they kill, a large amount of civilians, or they target a journalist, or they target aid workers, or whatever the case may be. They say here from the Associated Press that in an initial assessment, Israel had determined that the troops killed a Hamas operative named Mohammed Amin Shobaki and 8 other militants. Israel has struck ambulances and other emergency vehicles in the past, accusing Hamas militants of using them for transportation. However, none of the dead staffers from the Red Crescent and Civil Defense had that name, and no other bodies were reported found at the site, raising questions over the military's suggestion that the alleged militants were among the rescue workers. So in other words, they made that shit up, right? They intentionally, knowingly targeted, fired upon medical workers, and then immediately their justification is, oh, there was Hamas in there. What's our evidence for that? Oh shit, we don't have any. Trust us at face value, I guess. Even though we've repeatedly tried to pull off this same exact lie about 100 times over the last year. Now, they continue with more details on all of this, saying that the head of the OCHA's local office, Jonathan Whitall, said in a post on X that the missing workers were dispatched to rescue injured people when, quote, all 5 ambulances and 1 fire truck were struck, along with a UN vehicle that arrived later. For 5 days after the incident, Israel denied the UN the right to retrieve or aid the rescue workers. In one attempt to reach the site, Israeli forces opened fire on more civilians in the area, shooting 1 Palestinian woman in the head, along with a man who tried to rescue her. It continues, saying, quote, returning to the next day, we were finally able to reach the site and discovered a devastating scene. Ambulances, the UN vehicle, and fire truck had been crushed and partially buried. After hours of digging, we recovered 1 body, a civil defense worker, beneath his fire truck, Whitall said on Sunday. Quote, on the first day of Eid, we returned and recovered the bodies of 8 PRCS, 6 civil defense, and 1 UN staff. They were killed in their uniforms, driving their clearly marked vehicles, wearing their gloves, on their way to save lives. This should have never happened. In all, 15 bodies were recovered from the scene. And I can show you a little bit of this thread here as posted by Jonathan Whitall that Jeremy was just talking about there. This is them recovering some of the bodies from the scene. We get a little bit of a picture here of one of the fragments of, I'm guessing this is the UN vehicle that was struck. Now, the reason it's all mangled up like this is, again, because it looks like not only did Israel fire on multiple ambulances, a UN vehicle, as well as a fire truck, but then afterwards, when they knew what they did, they tried to cover it up, right? So then they went up to these vehicles, and I guess they crushed them with bulldozers, presumably, put them into this mangled mess, and then tried to throw dirt on top to cover up their crime, while simultaneously blocking the UN from being able to get to the scene to see what had actually happened. So this is them very clearly trying to cover their tracks. And again, one of the bodies was found underneath one of these fire trucks. We have another picture here. I think that this is the fire truck or one of the ambulances here. Again, mangled into oblivion. And you can see them here putting in their effort to try to, dig up whatever remaining bodies or vehicle parts may have been left in the area. Now, somehow it gets even worse from there. Finishing off here from Dropsite, saying Yusuf Harb, the deputy minister of health in Gaza, provided an update from Nasser Hospital, saying, quote, some of these civil defense members were found handcuffed. Almost all of them had gunshot wounds to the head and chest, and they were buried in deep holes. The Palestinian Red Crescent issued a demand that, quote, the perpetrators of this war crime be held accountable, that an immediate and urgent investigation be conducted to ensure justice for the victims of this massacre. And if I know anything about Israel, they are not going to do that, right? There will be no legitimate investigation. There will be no independent third-party investigation into this. There will not be any accountability for any of the IDF war criminals involved in this massacre, because that's exactly how it's played out over the last year and a half. You would hope that at some point the international community would step up. The United States would stop, being fully complicit in this and giving them the weapons that they're using for these kinds of massacres. But unfortunately, that doesn't seem like it's how it's playing out. Now, here we have an image of some of the, I guess, co-workers or grieving people inside of Gaza, surrounding some of the bodies of the Palestinian Red Crescent members who had been massacred. But yeah, I mean, does it get much more egregious than this? I mean, we're talking about firing upon a convoy of aid workers, medical workers, who are trying to go and help people who Israel just bombed, right? You have ambulances, you have a fire truck, you have a UN truck or vehicle, all very clearly marked as exactly what they are, desperately putting their lives on the line, trying to go and save other people's lives. And Israel fires upon them. Not only that, but then, if you believe this account, proceeded to then handcuff some of them and execute them. Summarily execute them, and then stuff them into a mass grave to try to cover up their crime. I mean, if this doesn't give you a perspective in terms of what Israel is doing in Gaza, this isn't about fighting Hamas. It's not about eliminating Hamas or removing them from power. This is about making life in Gaza impossible. This is a mass act of terrorism that Israel has been engaging in for over a year and a half now, with the full-fledged support from the United States of America. We have continued, unquestionably, to give them weapons, to give them bombs, to give them cover on the international stage. This is the kind of shit that we're covering for. Does this seem like something that the good guys do? Does this seem like something, only democracy in the Middle East does? Mass executing medical workers? I mean, again, doesn't get much more egregious than that. We also had an update here. Before I finish off the video, I wanted to mention this here from Haaretz, an opinion piece, where they follow up on the use of hostages, Palestinians, as human shields as a part of this genocide in Gaza. The headline is, in Gaza, almost every IDF platoon keeps a human shield, a sub-army of Palestinian slaves. Innocent Palestinians are regularly forced by soldiers to enter houses in Gaza to make sure there are no terrorists or explosives. So why is the IDF's Military Police Criminal Investigations Division only opening 6 investigations into the use of human shields? So this is really just a follow-up from a story that I covered, I think, a couple months ago at this point, where it was exposed that Israel basically has a routine practice, something that every single rank in their military outfit inside of Gaza is fully aware of and participating in. They will basically abduct Palestinian civilians and then use them as human shields. I've seen some instances, including, this goes to the West Bank as well, where they'll literally strap them onto the front of Jeeps as they're going to do their raids, right? In some instances, they push them to go and clear houses for them, to go into tunnels for them, explicitly using the very thing that they accuse Hamas of doing, of using Palestinians as human shields to try to justify this genocidal onslaught in Gaza. This is actual use of human shields. This is what it actually looks like to use human shields in the most literal definition of the word. So I'll leave you guys off with that. It's an absolute horror show every day. It seems like things are getting much worse. I would hold out hope, I guess, that maybe there's some sort of temporary truce that's able to be enacted, and this massacre can at least be given some sort of a brief reprieve. But if you look at what the Israeli government is saying, if you look at what the Trump administration is saying, they're serious about moving forward with a plan of full-blown ethnic cleansing, where the entire population of Gaza is removed, right? Shipped off to who knows where, or killed, or starved out, or bombed into oblivion, however it ends up shaking out. They seem very intent on that plan, and then annexing the territory for Israel. So I'll leave you guys off with that. Obviously, we're going to have more updates as the days and weeks go on, but it's an absolute fucking nightmare, man.
Politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me. Everyone is saying